I'd like to talk today about a book called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Came out in 2020. Talk about that book in terms of some of the implications for us as a society and how we can deal with this problem of race in a very constructive and a positive way. Isabel talks in the beginning of her book about a man, August Lenmesser, and she has this photograph of all of these people who are gathered, uh, and Hitler is talking, and everyone is giving the salute to Hitler except one person. And it's an amazing photograph when you look at it because you see all these people and they're all kind of going along with Hitler, cheering him on, and so excited. And one man is saying, "No, I'm not going to go along with this." And really, the theme of her book, and really something that's very instructive for all of us, is what we will go along with and what we won't go along with. Um, she also reflects on a reindeer kill that happened a few years ago in Russia. And what happened is in the town of Yamal in Russia, people were getting sick and they were wondering where this illness was coming from. And they traced it to reindeer, and they had to really incinerate all of the reindeer, and they had to incinerate them at 500 degrees Celsius. And their, uh, disease that was really infecting everyone else, and they really had to douse all of those cinders and the surrounding land around the reindeer kill with bleach, and kind of also very symbolic of what can happen when an illness gets into humanity. And sometimes we have to take radical measures to get rid of that illness. Sometimes we don't even realize what is the source, what is the origin of the illness, where does it come from. And when we realize and are able to define the illness and to define where the illness comes from, then we can take steps. And sometimes we have to take radical steps to destroy that illness, as in the case of the reindeer and the anthrax that was coming from them and infecting so many people and damaging so many lives. And can kind of compare this to how doctors deal with a patient who is ill. The first thing they do is they kind of sit down with the patient and get a family history. And they say, well, did your father have this, your grandfather? And it gives them a profile. And so when you have an illness like racism, when you have an evil like racism, when you have a sin like racism, what do you really have to do? You have to kind of look and say, well, where does this come from? How can we deal with it? How many people has it infected? Is it contagious in a way? Does it kind of go down from generation to generation? Many times we see this in a family with children just kind of picking up this racism kind of unconsciously as part of the family atmosphere. And so Isabella says, what we really have to do here is look at this and get a profile in terms of racism. And she talks about the caste system in America. And a lot of times we don't think of America as having a caste system. But she's really going to analyze it in those terms and say that the caste system that we have really in America is race. Um, Martin Luther King Jr. talked about this. And he says, every Negro, in a way, in America is an untouchable. At first, he didn't really think of it in those terms. But then, after a visit to India and observing the caste system and how those in the untouchable caste were treated, he realized the similarities with how Negroes are treated, Black people are treated in America. And so he made that statement about how every Negro is an untouchable. Uh, Charles Sumner talked about how separation can be a caste. So when people are separated, and of course, a lot of times in our society, people are separated, unfortunately, by race, and so we can develop this caste system. The sociologist Gunnar Myrdal talked about that in An American Dilemma. He said, caste is the most accurate term with regard to America and race. We do use other terms, of course, but Gunnar felt that, that was the most accurate term when you think of the system in America. Again, kind of shocking to us because we don't think of it in terms of caste. So we have to kind of unpack it a little bit and say, well, how does this term caste apply to race in America? Ashley Montagu said, race is a human invention. And so in his writings in 1942, he said, we have really a caste system here in America. It's not really race, because race, where does race come from, really? It is a invention that kind of came late on the scene, really. The caste really goes way back, and it is more accurate in describing what we experience in America here in terms of Black people. Madison Grant in 1916 talked about, in his book, The Passing of the Great Race, he said, Jim Crow serves the same purpose as the caste system in India. So this whole Jim Crow system that was corrected really is to keep people at a very low level. That's the intention, to keep them in this untouchable level because they're not really equal to everyone else. So that was the purpose, the mentality behind Jim Crow, and he parallels that with the caste system. Thomas Pierce Bailey said, let the lowest white man count for more than the highest Negro. So again, this was the mentality that was expressed in terms of race in America, that the lowest white person would be at a much higher plane than even the highest achieving Black person. So that mentality kind of expressed, I think, the whole concept of caste in America. Bimro Ambedkar, who was an untouchable, he studied in the U.S. and he became a leader of the untouchables in India. And he wrote to W.E. Du Bois about the similarities between the untouchables and the Blacks in America. And he asked the question that is kind of reflective of this whole situation. And the question is, why did God make me an outcast and a stranger in my own house? So here I am, I'm in my own house of America. Why is it that I am an outcast? Why is it that I am a stranger? Kenneth Stamp said the calling, the assigning of race to be a caste system. So race kind of invented to put people in their place and to have this caste system in place. Alexis de Tocqueville, the historian who visited America, had a very interesting observation. He said, the prejudice of race appears to be stronger in the states that have abandoned slavery than in those where it still exists. And nowhere is it so intolerant as in those states where servitude has never been known. So this racial system was present not only in states that had slavery, but de Tocqueville noticed it even more in states where slavery never even existed. Submission is required of the slave, not just for the master, but really for every white person. So it shows you how this is a much larger issue than just slavery, because you can see it, the slave and the master, you can see that sort of relationship and how it developed. But the slave, the Black person, had to have this idea of submission for every white person, not just their master. So you can see how this whole thing developed. And what the colonialists developed and created was an extreme form of slavery that existed nowhere else in the world, We tend to think of this as just slavery and existed in other places, but this type of slavery was really extreme. So it kind of goes beyond slavery to something else. And no one was willing to admit that they lived in an economy whose bottom gear was slavery.